The morning after my wife's funeral, the house still smelled of white flowers and cold coffee when my attorney placed a cedar box on the dining table. Inside were 7 sealed envelopes, each written in her hand. Before I touched the first one, my son leaned in and said, "Dad, maybe we should talk about the estate first." His brothers nodded too quickly. I looked at them, then at my quiet grandson by the window. "No," I said. None of them knew each letter would slowly strip away everything they were trying to keep. Before we go any further, I just want to say, having you here means more than I can put into words. Drop a comment, and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country, I'd love to know. Every single comment reminds me why these grandpa stories are worth telling. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything it asks you to feel is entirely intentional. It was a Tuesday morning in November, when I buried my wife of 45 years, the kind of Portland morning where the sky sits so low and gray. It feels like the city is being pressed down from above, and the maple leaves on Eastbrook Drive had gone the color of old rust overnight, dropping one by one onto the wet pavement, like the whole neighborhood was letting go of something at the same time I was. Riverside Memorial smelled the way these places always do. Carnations and carpet cleaner. That particular combination you only ever encounter in funeral homes, as if grief requires its own signature scent, and someone decided the most appropriate choice was 2 of the most lifeless things they could find. I'd been to enough of these over the years to recognize it the moment the door opened. But I'd never thought I'd be sitting in the front row of one for Margaret. 45 years. 45 years of waking up next to the same woman, and now I was sitting in a borrowed suit watching strangers cry over her. Philip Hartman, my attorney, and one of the few men I'd trusted completely for 30 years, sat 2 rows behind me. He'd squeezed my shoulder when I walked in, and hadn't said another word since. That was Philip. He understood that some moments don't need filling. Nathan arrived first, 20 minutes before the service started. My second son walked through the door in a charcoal suit that moved the way only hand-stitched fabric moves that particular drape that announces its own price tag without saying a word. He was 46 years old and looked exactly like what he'd spent 20 years becoming, a man who'd practiced warmth so long he'd stopped noticing it was a performance. He worked the room like it was a cocktail reception in Manhattan, shaking hands, leaning in close, his voice pitched low and sympathetic, in a way that made people feel attended to without actually being seen. When he reached me, he bent down and wrapped his arms around me. His cologne was sharp and expensive. His hands were soft, not a single callus on them. "Dad," he said, "I'm so sorry, she was incredible." "Sit down, Nathan," I said. He patted my arm exactly twice the precise practiced number of times that communicates sympathy without commitment, and moved to find his seat. Dominic came in 10 minutes before the service began. My third son, 43 years old, a family law attorney out of Seattle, with the kind of face that gave nothing away useful in a courtroom, strange at a funeral. He was already reading something on his phone when he walked through the door, scrolling with his thumb, while his body navigated the room on autopilot. He kissed my cheek, said, "I'm here, Dad," in the same measured tone he probably used to tell opposing counsel he'd reviewed their filing, and sat down behind Nathan. His phone buzzed twice during the opening prayer. He silenced it without looking down. I suppose that counted for something. Carter was the one who surprised me. My youngest, 39, the only one of my boys who'd stayed in Portland, had arrived before I did. He was already in his seat when I walked in, and the moment he saw me, he crossed the room and pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough to feel like it meant something. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice catching just slightly. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." I held on to him for a moment. His voice was steady, warm. Everything you'd want from a son in a moment like this. And yet even then, even with Margaret's casket 15 feet away and my chest full of something I didn't have a name for, I caught it. The way Carter's eyes moved over my shoulder while he was still holding me, scanning the room, taking inventory of who was there, who was talking to whom, which conversations he might need to insert himself into. I was a man who'd built a business from nothing. I'd learned to read rooms before I learned to read balance sheets. The skill had gotten into my bones whether I wanted it there or not. I let go and sat back down. Ryan came in after the service had already started. My grandson, 22 years old, the son of Marcus, my oldest boy who'd been gone 8 years, now slipped through the side door in a white button-down that had been ironed, but not recently. He moved quietly the way people move when they're trying not to draw attention, found an empty seat at the end of a middle row, and lowered himself into it without disturbing a soul. He looked like he'd been crying for days and had finally run dry. Not the polished, presentable grief you see performed in rooms like this, the dabbed eyes and meaningful pauses. This was the real kind. His jaw was clenched. His hands were laced together so tight the knuckles had gone white. His eyes were fixed on the casket, like he was trying to hold a conversation with it that the rest of us couldn't hear. The pastor read from notes he'd written after a single meeting with our family, filling in Margaret's name, where the blanks were the way pastors do when they didn't actually know the person they're eulogizing. I didn't blame him. I just sat there and listened to someone else's version of my wife and thought about how no one in this room could possibly have known her the way I did. When it was over, when the last stranger had pressed my hand and told me Margaret was at peace now, I watched Ryan walk up to the casket alone. He put one hand flat on the polished wood, bowed his head, and stood there. 5 minutes. Maybe longer. Long enough that I heard the quiet shift of people growing uncomfortable behind me, the rustle of programs, the careful clearing of throats. Nathan leaned over to Dominic and said something low. Dominic shook his head. Carter watched Ryan with an expression I couldn't quite read from where I sat. Ryan didn't notice any of it. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the rest of us hadn't been invited. When he finally stepped back, he didn't look at anyone. He turned and walked to the rear of the room, choosing a seat near the side exit, the same door Margaret used to sneak through when church ran long, because she always said the Holy Spirit could find her just as easily in the parking lot. The memory landed behind my sternum like a stone dropped into still water. Sharp, specific, gone before I could hold on to it. The reception was held in the adjoining hall. Paper cups of lukewarm coffee and cookies that tasted like they'd been made by a machine that had studied cookies in theory. I stood near the window and watched my family. Nathan and Dominic had gravitated toward each other near the coffee station, heads slightly inclined, speaking in the low, deliberate way of men exchanging information rather than comfort. Carter was moving through the guests, a hand on a shoulder here, a murmured word there, making sure everyone who mattered had seen him. Ryan stood alone at the far window, holding a cup of coffee. He hadn't touched his eyes somewhere outside in the gray November street. I was still watching him when Philip appeared quietly at my side. "Henry," he said. He was holding a small wooden box, cedar maybe 6 inches long, sanded smooth and simple. "Margaret asked me to give you this today, not tomorrow. Today, while your family is still here." He paused and something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite readable. She was very specific about that. I took the box. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, resting on a strip of dark felt, were 7 envelopes, each one sealed, each one numbered in Margaret's handwriting, that careful, slightly left-leaning cursive I'd watched move across birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on the kitchen counter for 45 years. "Thank you, Philip," I said. He nodded and stepped away without another word. I stood in the middle of that reception hall with the box in both hands and the noise of polite grief moving around me, and I looked at those 7 envelopes, and I thought she planned this. Of course she did. Margaret always planned for the things I couldn't bring myself to think about. I looked up. Across the room, Nathan was checking his watch. Dominic had his phone out again. Carter was hugging a woman I didn't recognize, his hand moving in slow, practiced circles on her back. Ryan hadn't moved from the window. I closed the box and pressed it against my side. Whatever was inside those envelopes, she'd needed me to have them, while I could still see their faces. The house on Eastbrook Drive had a particular sound when it was full of people, not the noise itself, but the weight underneath it. The low hum of a building holding more than its usual share of breathing and moving and wanting. Margaret would have liked that sound. She always said the house went too quiet after the boys grew up and scattered. By the second morning after the funeral, I understood what she meant. I understood it the way you only understand things when they've been taken away first. I came downstairs just after 6 to find Ryan already in the kitchen, standing at the stove in jeans and a gray long-sleeve hair still damp. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask if I'd slept. He just moved around the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was kept. Because he'd lived here long enough to learn the logic of Margaret's cabinets and set a bowl of oatmeal in front of me. Brown sugar, pinch of cinnamon, sliced banana arranged across the top. Margaret's oatmeal, exactly the way she'd made it every Sunday for 40 years. He sat down across from me with his coffee and didn't mention it. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "A little." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "You?" "Not much." He nodded like that was exactly the right answer, and we sat in the early morning quiet of the kitchen, while the rain came down soft and steady against the window above the sink. The kind of Portland November rain that doesn't announce itself, just arrives and stays. Nathan came down around 7:15 in a suit that was only slightly less formal than the one he'd worn to the funeral. He opened the refrigerator, stared into it for a long moment, and closed it again. "Dad, you should be eating more protein," he said, eyeing my bowl. "Oatmeal isn't going to cut it. You need to keep your strength up." "Good morning, Nathan," I said. "I can make eggs." "The oatmeal is fine." He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "I was thinking at some point this week we should sit down and go over the practical things. Insurance accounts, any outstanding financial arrangements. Just to make sure everything is in order so you don't have to deal with it alone." Across the table, Ryan's jaw tightened just slightly. He lifted his mug and took a slow sip and didn't look up. "There'll be time for that," I said. Of course, of course." Nathan held up one hand, the picture of reasonableness. "No pressure. I just want to be helpful." He said it warmly. He always said things warmly. That was the thing about Nathan. The warmth was real enough that you couldn't call it false, but it was also never quite separate from what he wanted. After 30 years of negotiating deals, I knew the difference between a man being generous and a man making a down payment. Dominic appeared at 8 with his laptop already open, walking and reading at the same time, in the focused, slightly absent way of someone whose mind lived primarily in documents. He was the tallest of my boys, and the most contained emotions moved through Dominic, the way weather moved through a sealed room. You could tell something was happening, but you couldn't get to it. "Morning," he said, settling at the far end of the table. He looked up at me over the screen. "Quick question, Dad. Do you know which firm Margaret used for her personal estate planning? I want to make sure we have the full picture going into this." "Philip handles everything," I said. "Right. But she may have had separate counsel for certain personal assets. It's not uncommon for spouses to." "Philip handles everything, Dominic." He studied me for a moment, with those flat, careful eyes of his. Then he nodded once and went back to his screen. Carter was the last one down. He walked into the kitchen, already moving toward me like checking on me was the first task on his morning list. He put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed, warm and deliberate. "How are you really doing, Dad?" "I'm managing. Are you eating enough, sleeping?" "Ryan made breakfast." Carter glanced over at Ryan, who was carrying his bowl to the sink. Something passed across Carter's face, quick, subtle, the kind of expression that comes and goes so fast, you almost wonder if you imagined it. "That's sweet of him," he said, his voice perfectly pleasant, the way a compliment can be perfectly pleasant and still land slightly wrong. Ryan rinsed his bowl, dried his hands on the dish towel, and set it back on the hook without a word. The rest of that day settled into a kind of pattern. Nathan worked from the dining room table, speaking on calls in the low-clipped tones of a man conducting business, hanging up the moment he heard my footsteps in the hall. Dominic had turned the guest room into a secondary office. Carter circled me with quiet attentiveness, appearing at the right moments with water, with gentle suggestions about rest, with observations about the importance of routine during periods of loss. He was never far away, never quite far enough away. In the mid-afternoon, I found myself standing at the upstairs hallway window, looking down into the side yard. The garage door was open. The light inside was on. Ryan was flat on his back on the concrete floor, head under the side door frame, a wrench in his hand, working on the hinge that had been sticking since September. I'd been meaning to fix it for 2 months. I hadn't gotten around to it. Nobody had asked him to do it. There was no conversation I could think of where the subject had even come up. He'd simply seen something that needed doing and done it. I watched him work for a while, without moving from the window. He had his father's hands, Marcus's hands, wide across the knuckles, always slightly marked up from whatever he'd been working on. Marcus used to fix things around this house the same way. Patient, methodical, more interested in doing it right than doing it fast. I turned away from the window before the memory could go anywhere. I wasn't ready to follow it. That evening, after dinner had been eaten and the kitchen cleaned, I sat in the armchair in the living room, with the cedar box on the side table beside me. The 7 letters. I'd been sitting with it for 20 minutes and hadn't opened it yet. From upstairs came the sound of Nathan's voice through the ceiling, low and rapid and purposeful, the rhythm of a man directing something rather than simply talking to someone. The words themselves were swallowed by the old insulation, mostly. But in the brief pause before he lowered his voice further, words came through the floorboards, with complete clarity, sharp as a pin. "Wait for the letters." I sat very still. The refrigerator cycled on in the kitchen. The rain outside thickened against the windows. I looked at the cedar box sitting on the table beside my chair, at Margaret's handwriting on those 7 sealed envelopes, and I thought about the particular patience in those 4 words. Not grief, not anxiety, strategy. Tomorrow night, I decided. I would ask them all to come downstairs tomorrow night, and I would open the first one. I gave them 1 more day, not because I needed the time, if anything. The waiting made it worse, the way a splinter works deeper the longer you leave it alone. I gave them the day because I wanted to watch them, not knowing when it was coming. I wanted to see what they did with the uncertainty. What they did mostly was circle. By the evening of the 4th day after Margaret's funeral, I'd seen enough. I walked to the bottom of the stairs at 7:30 and called up in a voice I hadn't used since the boys were teenagers and dinner was getting cold. "Living room, all of you, now." Philip Hartman, who had driven over without being asked, because that was the kind of man Philip was, the kind who showed up before you knew you needed him, was already seated in the corner armchair, a leather folio across his knees. He was 62 years old, gray-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but patience. He'd been handling my legal affairs for 30 years. He already knew what was in these letters. He'd helped Margaret seal them. They filed in 1 by 1. Nathan came first, still in his dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, carrying the casual confidence of a man who assumes every room he enters was waiting for him. He took the center of the sofa without asking if anyone else wanted it. Dominic sat beside him, spine straight, hands folded across one knee. He looked at the cedar box on the coffee table, the way he probably looked at evidence files, registering, cataloging, giving nothing back. Carter came in last from downstairs, drying his hands on a dish towel, like he'd been washing up. He sat in the armchair closest to me, close enough that I could smell the same soap he'd used since he was 12. "Is everything okay, Dad?" he asked, his brow creasing with concern. "Everything's fine," I said. "Sit down." Ryan took the chair by the window, the same chair he'd chosen at the reception. The same chair he always chose in this room, the one slightly outside the main circle, close enough to be present and far enough to observe. I'd noticed that about him years ago. Ryan never planted himself at the center of anything. I opened the cedar box, took out the first envelope. Margaret's handwriting on the front, just the number 1, nothing else. My hands were steady. I'd decided they would be. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. 2 pages, front and back, written in the careful cursive that had been signing my birthday cards for 45 years. I cleared my throat. "I'm going to read this out loud," I said. "All of it. Don't interrupt." And I read. Margaret wrote about the morning she was diagnosed, how she'd sat in the car in the hospital parking lot for 40 minutes before driving home, listening to the radio, watching people walk in and out of the entrance like it was an ordinary Tuesday, because it was an ordinary Tuesday for everyone except her. She wrote about deciding not to tell me right away, not because she wanted to carry it alone, but because she needed a few days to figure out which version of herself she wanted to be during whatever came next. She wrote about watching our family over the past several years, about the things she'd seen, about the things she hadn't been able to unsee. And then her voice on the page shifted, became quieter, more deliberate. "Henry, I need you to understand something before you read the letters that follow. I'm not writing these to punish anyone. I'm writing them because I love you, and because I watched you carry something alone for too long, the knowledge that the family we built together has grown into something neither of us fully recognized. I need you to see it clearly, not through the fog of missing me. Clearly." I stopped, took a breath, kept reading. "And I need you to know, this one of our sons is doing something right now while you sit in that room together that I could not bring myself to name while I was alive. I didn't have the courage. I'm asking you to have it for both of us. Watch them, Henry. Watch all of them. The truth will show itself." I folded the letter and set it on my knee. The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. I looked up slowly, taking my time, moving from face to face the way you move a flashlight through a dark room. Nathan had his jaw set, both hands flat on his thighs, staring at a point just past my left shoulder. Dominic's expression hadn't shifted, but his right thumb was pressing into his palm, hard enough to leave a mark. Carter had his hand pressed over his mouth, and his eyes were wet at the corners, and if I hadn't known him his entire life, I might have thought the tears were grief. Ryan was the only one looking directly at me. His face was open in a way the others weren't, not calculating, not performing, just present. He was watching me the way you watch someone who's carrying something heavy to see if they need help. "Does anyone have anything to say?" I asked. Nathan spoke first. His voice was measured and careful, the voice he used when he was managing a situation. "Dad, this was written when she was very sick. I think we should be careful about reading too much into. She wrote this 6 months before she died," I said. "On a Wednesday afternoon, Philip witnessed it." Philip from his corner said nothing. He didn't need to. Nathan closed his mouth. Dominic unfolded his hands and refolded them the other way. "What does the rest of the letter say?" He asked, his tone perfectly neutral, like he was asking about a footnote in a contract. "That's all of it," I said. Carter lowered his hand from his mouth. His voice, when it came, was soft and careful, threaded through with just enough emotion to sound unguarded. "Dad, whatever Mom thought she saw, we're a family. Whatever's going on, we can talk about it. We don't need to." "There are 6 more letters," I said. "I'll open the next one when I'm ready." I stood up, which ended the conversation. "You can go." They went. Nathan and Dominic left together, walking close, their voices dropping to something I couldn't catch the moment they cleared the doorway. Carter paused at the threshold, and looked back at me with those careful, wet eyes, like he wanted to say something else. "Good night, Carter," I said. He nodded and went. Ryan was the last one standing. He hadn't moved from the window chair. He looked at me across the room, and what I saw on his face wasn't calculation or damage control or performance. It was something simpler and harder to look at than any of those things. It was worry. "Grandpa," he said, the Vietnamese word for grandfather, that Margaret had taught him the year we brought him home, the one that stuck and never got replaced. "Are you okay?" My chest pulled tight. "I will be," I said. "Go get some sleep." He held my gaze for another moment, like he was making sure the answer was real, and not just the answer I'd decided to give. Then he nodded, pushed himself out of the chair, and headed for the stairs. I sat back down with the cedar box in my lap. 6 envelopes left. Outside, the November rain was still going, patient and relentless, the way rain in Portland always is, like it has nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world to get there. I pressed one hand flat against the lid of the box. "Watch them, Henry. The truth will show itself." I already was. The morning after I read the first letter, the house rearranged itself. Not physically, the furniture stayed where it was. The coffee maker still gurgled at 6:45, the fourth step from the bottom still creaked, the way it had since Carter was in middle school, and used it to sneak downstairs for cereal at midnight. But the people inside the house moved differently, spoke differently. The air between them had changed overnight, the way air changes before a storm, still charged full of things that hadn't decided what shape to take yet. I noticed it at breakfast. Nathan was quieter than usual, which for Nathan meant something. He ate his eggs, standing at the counter phone in one hand, fork in the other, and when I walked in, he looked up and said, "Morning, Dad," a half-second too fast, like the greeting had been sitting ready on his lips, waiting to be deployed. "Morning," I said, and poured my coffee and watched him from the corner of my eye. He left the house by 8 without saying where he was going. The day passed the way days do when everyone in a house is thinking hard and trying not to look like it. Dominic worked. Carter hovered. Ryan came and went from the garage where I could hear him doing something involving a level and a drill, fixing the sagging shelf unit in the back corner. I realized when I went out to look the one I'd been meaning to deal with since spring. "You don't have to do that," I told him. He looked up from where he was crouched on the floor, pencil tucked behind his ear. "I know," he said, and went back to it. That was the whole conversation. With Ryan, that was usually enough. By 9 that evening, the house had settled into its nighttime quiet. I was in the living room with a book I wasn't actually reading when I heard footsteps in the upstairs hallway, too measured to be accidental, the footsteps of someone who knew exactly which boards to avoid. A door opened softly. A door that wasn't Nathan's room, Ryan's room. I set the book down. 20 minutes later, the footsteps came back down the hall. A door clicked shut. I sat there and thought about what that meant, and my jaw ached from clenching it. And I thought about Argret's letter, one of our is doing something right now. And I thought about the particular expression on Nathan's face that morning, that half-second too fast greeting. The next morning, Ryan came to find me in the kitchen just after 7. He was already dressed, and there was something in the set of his shoulders, the way he moved, deliberate, like he'd decided something in the night, and was carrying the decision carefully. He sat down across from me and put both hands flat on the table. "Uncle Nathan came to my room last night," he said. My stomach went cold and tight. "Tell me," I said. Ryan took a breath. "He knocked around 9:30, came in, closed the door. He was holding an envelope." Ryan's jaw worked for a moment, like the words needed a running start. "He said there was $50,000 in it. Cash. He said all I needed to do was tell you that I didn't remember anything unusual from the past few years. That I'd been writing in that notebook Grandma gave me, but there was nothing worth mentioning. The coffee in my mug was going cold, and I didn't touch it." "What did you say?" Ryan looked at me steadily. His eyes were clear and tired and 22 years old and somehow much older than that all at once. I told him I didn't want it. I told him to take it and go. And he said I was being naive. He said, Ryan stopped. His hands pressed harder against the tabletop. He said Grandma was sick when she wrote those letters, that she wasn't thinking clearly, that I was going to inherit nothing if I didn't play this smart. The ache in my chest spread outward slow and heavy, the way a bruise deepens hours after the impact. I looked at my grandson, this boy I'd brought home at 14, with nothing but a duffel bag, and his father's eyes, and I felt something that was equal parts grief and gratitude, and a ferocious, bone-deep pride. Ryan, I said, do you need that money? He thought about it. Really thought about it, which was so like him he never answered questions he hadn't actually considered. Yeah, he said finally. I could use $50,000. He looked up. But not like that. My throat closed around whatever I was going to say next. I swallowed it down. You did right, I said. He nodded, once pushed back from the table, and went to pour himself more coffee. The conversation was over. That was Ryan, he said what needed saying, and then let the air settle. I sat with it for a few minutes after he went back upstairs. Then I got up and went to the kitchen to start the dishes, because standing still felt impossible, and because Margaret always said that doing something useful with your hands was the best thing to do when your mind was running somewhere it couldn't go yet. The dish soap smelled like lemons. Margaret had always bought the lemon kind. I was rinsing the second mug when Carter came in. He was wearing a flannel shirt and slippers, his hair still flattened on one side from sleep. He looked rumpled and harmless, and like the youngest of my sons, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car trips. Morning, Dad. He went straight to the cabinet for a mug, filled it from the pot. Did you sleep? Some, I said. He leaned against the counter and wrapped both hands around his mug, the same gesture Ryan had used. I noticed, though they'd arrived at it from completely different directions. I was thinking... Carter said, his voice easy and conversational, like what he was about to say wasn't something he'd rehearsed. Maybe today we could do something normal. Go get breakfast somewhere. Just get out of the house for a bit. You've been cooped up in here for days. That's thoughtful, I said. We could even take Ryan, he added, which was when I understood that the invitation wasn't really about me at all. I set the mug down on the drying rack and turned off the faucet. I'll think about it, I said. Carter smiled, warm, genuine, looking exactly the right amount of warmth. He pushed off the counter and went to open the back door to let some air in. While he was standing there with his back to me, he set his coffee mug down on the windowsill and opened the cabinet beneath the kitchen window. The low one, the one that had always held odds and ends, rubber bands and spare batteries and old takeout menus. He pulled something out. Small. Something that fit in his palm. He tucked it into the front pocket of his flannel shirt in one smooth motion, then turned back around with the same easy expression, like he'd just been checking if we needed dish soap. I'll let you finish up, he said. Holler if you need anything. He left. I stood at the sink with my hands still damp from the dishes, staring at the cabinet door he'd left slightly ajar. Something about the motion stayed with me, practiced smooth, the action of a man who had done this before. I didn't know what he'd taken. I didn't know what it meant. I filed it away, the way you file things you don't have a category for yet. And I finished the dishes, and I let the morning move on without it. I looked at the slightly open cabinet door, and I thought, which one? The 7th day after Margaret's funeral fell on a Monday, and Portland was doing what Portland does in November, raining without apology, the kind of steady gray drizzle that gets into everything and stays. Philip called at 8 in the morning and asked if he could come by at 10. He said it wasn't urgent. The way he said it told me it was. I asked Ryan to be there. I didn't explain why. He showed up in the living room at 9:50 with 2 mugs of coffee, and the particular alertness of someone who has learned that when older people summon you without explanation, The explanation is usually something that requires sitting down. Philip arrived exactly at 10. He shook my hand, nodded to Ryan, and set his briefcase on the dining table. From inside, he pulled a manila accordion folder, thick, rubber-banded, the kind that lawyers use when they have more paper than a standard folder can hold. "Margaret gave me this 14 months ago," he said. "She asked me to keep it until after the first letter had been opened and the family had had time to settle." He paused on that word in a way that suggested he'd chosen it carefully. "Inside, you'll find Ryan's journal handwritten entries she asked him to keep beginning about 2 years ago. Dates, conversations, observations about the family. He recorded things as he saw them honestly and without knowing why she'd asked. Over 2 years, it became a timeline and 11 audio recordings." Ryan's mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "She asked me to keep that journal," he said slowly. "She said it was just writing practice. She said it would help me think more clearly." "It did more than that," Philip said. I looked at the folder. "Philip, how long had she been planning this?" Philip folded his hands on the table. "She started keeping notes about 2 years ago. Quietly, the way Margaret did everything without announcing it. Phone records, bank statements, small observations she wrote in a notebook she kept in her bedside drawer. When the diagnosis came, she didn't slow down. She accelerated." He paused, and something moved across his face, not quite grief, more like the expression of a man who witnessed something extraordinary and is still processing it. "She told me, Philip, I don't have time to hope they'll figure it out on their own. I have to build them a map." The air went out of my lungs slowly. 2 years. She had been carrying this for 2 years, sitting across from me at the dinner table, sleeping beside me in our bed, handing me my coffee every morning, and never once let it show on her face. My throat burned. My hands pressed flat against the table. "She was sick," I said. "She was sick, and she was still doing all of this." "She said it was the only thing that made the time feel useful," Philip said. "Her words exactly." Ryan set his mug down. His jaw was tight. His eyes had gone bright and wet, and he was pressing his lips together hard, fighting something back. "She used my journal as evidence," he said. "Not accusing, just saying the shape of it out loud, the way you repeat something to make it real. She used it to protect you," Philip said. "There's a difference." Philip reached into the folder and removed a smaller envelope sealed Margaret's handwriting on the front. "Letter 2. For Henry and Ryan. Together." "She was specific," Philip said. "She wanted you both in the room when this one was opened." I picked it up. Ryan leaned forward. I broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. "Henry and Ryan," I read. "If you are reading this together, then Philip has done his job and you have done yours. Ryan, I owe you an apology. I asked you to keep that journal without telling you why. I told myself I was protecting you from a weight you were too young to carry. The truth is, I needed a witness, and I trusted you more than anyone else in this family to see things clearly and write them down honestly. You were never a pawn in this. You were the only person I was certain of from the very beginning. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I love you both more than these pages can hold. Margaret." Ryan's breath left him in one long, unsteady exhale. His chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he pressed both hands over his face and just held them there, his whole frame trembling with the effort of containing something too large for his body. "She knew," he said from behind his hands. "She knew the whole time, and she still—" His voice broke completely. He pulled his hand down, eyes red and streaming jaw working. "She still let me think I was just keeping a diary. She let you be a 22-year-old, I said, for as long as she could." He looked at me, really looked at me, and something passed between us that I don't have adequate words for. The recognition of two people who loved the same woman and are only now understanding the full dimensions of what she built around them while they weren't looking. Philip closed the folder gently. There are 11 recordings on the USB drive inside. I'd suggest listening to them in order. Margaret numbered them. How bad are they? I asked. Philip picked up his briefcase. Bad enough that she spent 14 months deciding whether to leave them at all. He paused at the door. She decided the truth was kinder than the alternative. I happened to agree with her. After he left, Ryan and I sat at the table with the USB drive between us and the second letter still open in front of us, and the rain kept coming down outside, steady and unhurried. The way Margaret had always moved through the world, patient, purposeful, never wasting a single step. When do we listen to them? Ryan asked. Tomorrow, I said. Tonight I just want to sit with this. He nodded. He picked up the letter and read it one more time from the beginning, his lips moving slightly on the last line. And I watched him and thought she was right about him. She was right about everything. It started on the 8th day, not with anything dramatic, no sudden collapse, no alarming symptom that would have sent a reasonable man straight to the doctor. Just a slow, creeping wrongness that arrived each morning like an uninvited guest and made itself at home for a few hours before fading away. A faint dizziness when I stood up from the bed. A low-grade tremor in my right hand that hadn't been there before. A thickness behind my eyes like the world was coming through a slightly dirty pane of glass. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was the disrupted sleep, the changed routine, the simple physical consequence of carrying too much for too long. 69-year-old men who'd just buried their wives of 45 years were entitled to a little dizziness. That was what I told myself. On the 9th morning, Carter called Dr. Elena Brooks, our family physician. For the past 15 years, a sharp, direct woman in her mid-50s who had the particular gift of telling you difficult things without making you feel ambushed by them. She arrived at the house by 10, set her bag on the kitchen table, and ran through the standard checks: blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen levels, reflexes. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, she told me, sitting across from me with her notepad, but not alarmingly. Your heart sounds fine. Reflexes are normal. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Henry, you lost your wife 2 weeks ago. Your body is processing something enormous. The symptoms you're describing are consistent with acute grief response and sleep disruption. I'm going to add a B-complex vitamin to your morning routine, and I want you walking 20 minutes a day, even if it's just around the block. That's it, I said. That's it for now, she said firmly. If things don't improve in 2 weeks, call me and we'll run more panels. She glanced toward the hallway where Carter was hovering just out of sight, with the careful positioning of someone trying to appear casual. Are you eating? Ryan makes sure of it, I said. She smiled at that, a small, real smile. Good. Listen to Ryan. After she left, Carter appeared in the kitchen doorway, with a cup of tea in both hands, held out toward me like an offering. Chamomile and lemon balm, he said. It's good for stress. I read an article. Thank you, Carter, I said and took it. That was the thing about Carter's tea. It was always exactly right, the right temperature, the right blend, delivered at the right moment. He'd been bringing it to my room every morning since the day after the funeral, appearing at my bedroom door at 7:15, without fail setting the cup on the nightstand, asking how I'd slept. It was the kind of attentiveness that should have felt like comfort. It had started to feel like something else. I noticed the pattern on the 10th morning, sitting up in bed with the tea cooling on my nightstand, tracing back through the days. The dizziness, the tremor, the foggy heaviness behind my eyes. It was always worse in the mornings. Always after breakfast. Always I turned the thought over slowly after Carter's tea. I set the cup down and did not drink from it. What I did instead was get dressed, go downstairs at my usual time, and behave exactly as I always behaved. I thanked Carter for the tea when he asked if I'd had it. I ate breakfast. I talked to Nathan about the weather in New York. I watched Carter move through the kitchen with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who had no reason to be nervous about anything. I did not tell Ryan what I was thinking. Not yet. But I started watching more carefully. 2 mornings later, I came downstairs 20 minutes earlier than usual. The kitchen was empty except for Carter, who was standing at the counter with his back to me, going through the motions of making tea. The electric kettle was running. The chamomile bags were out. And Carter's right hand, steady, practiced Carter, was moving over the cup in a way that stopped the moment he heard my footstep on the bottom stair. He turned around. His face arranged itself into its default expression, open, warm, slightly concerned. "Dad, you're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "I was just making your tea." He held the cup out. "Thank you," I said, and took it and carried it upstairs and poured it into the soil of the potted fern Margaret had kept on the windowsill for 12 years. The fern was already doing unusually well. I'd been noticing that for several days without understanding why. On the 12th morning, Ryan knocked on my bedroom door before 7. He was already dressed, which told me he hadn't slept much. He was holding his phone with both hands, and his face had that look, the one I'd only seen on him a handful of times, the look of a young man who has just confirmed something he was desperately hoping he was wrong about. "Grandpa," he said. His voice was careful, like he was carrying something fragile. "I need to show you something." "Come in," I said. "Sit down." He sat on the edge of the chair by the window and turned his phone toward me. On the screen was a document, a chemical analysis report from a private testing service, the kind of independent lab that university chemistry students sometimes used for coursework projects. His friend he'd mentioned once was finishing a graduate degree in analytical chemistry at Portland State. "I kept a sample of the tea," Ryan said. His hands were trembling very slightly against the phone. "From 10 days ago. I sent it to a friend who works with a testing lab." He swallowed. "He called me last night." I looked at the report. The language was technical, but one compound appeared in the results section with a small explanatory note that Ryan's friend had added in plain English beside it. "Scopolamine anticholinergic compound. Medical uses include motion sickness prevention and pre-surgical sedation. At low doses, dizziness, mild cognitive impairment, increased suggestibility. At higher doses, serious neurological effects." I read it twice. My heart was not racing the way I would have expected. It was beating with a slow, heavy deliberateness, like it was working harder than usual to do the same job. "The dizziness," I said. "The tremor," Ryan said. "The foggy feeling in the mornings." His voice cracked on the last word, and he pressed his lips together hard, jaw tight, eyes going bright and wet. "Grandpa, someone has been—" He stopped, started again. "Someone has been putting this in your tea every morning." I set the phone down on the bed between us. I looked at my grandson, this 22-year-old boy who had gotten up every morning for the past 12 days and gone quietly about the work of noticing, without telling anyone, without making accusations, without asking for anything, just watching and recording and protecting in the only way he knew how. My eyes stung hard. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment. "Ryan," I said when I could trust my voice, "you did the right thing." His chin shook once. He pressed it steady. "What do we do?" he asked. I looked toward the bedroom door, closed solid, separating us from the rest of the house. From the kitchen, where Carter was probably at this very moment going about the ordinary business of making breakfast. "Not yet," I said. "We don't do anything yet." I looked back at Ryan. "Can you keep this between us for a few more days?" His eyes searched my face. "You already have a plan," he said. It wasn't a question. I reached over and put my hand on his arm briefly, firmly. "Trust me," I said. He exhaled through his nose, nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I trust you." By the 12th day, the rain had finally taken a breath. A thin strip of pale November sun came through the workshop window in the late afternoon and lay across the workbench like something tentative, like light, that wasn't sure yet if it was welcome. I was sanding the second panel of the jewelry box when Ryan came through the side door with both hands in his jacket pockets and that particular set to his jaw that meant he'd been working up to something for a while. "I need to tell you what I found," he said. "I know what you found," I said. He stopped walking. His hands came out of his pockets. "What?" "The vial. Carter's sweatshirt. 6:14 in the morning." I set down the sandpaper. "I've known since day 9, Ryan. I saw him at the cabinet the morning after you first noticed the pattern. I didn't say anything because I needed to be certain. And then I needed to decide what to do with certain." The color shifted in Ryan's face, confusion first, then something that looked like relief trying to coexist with frustration. His hand came up and pressed against the back of his neck. "You knew," he said. "You knew, and you kept drinking the tea." "I stopped drinking the tea on day 10, I said. "I've been pouring it into Margaret's fern by the kitchen window. The fern is fine for the record. Apparently scopolamine doesn't affect ferns." Ryan stared at me for a long moment. Then a sound came out of him, half disbelief, half something that wanted to be a laugh, but couldn't quite get there, given the circumstances. "You tested me," he said. "I gave you the space to find it yourself," I said. "That's different." "Is it?" I set both hands flat on the workbench. "Sit down, Ryan." He pulled out the stool and sat elbows on his knees, watching me with those clear, direct eyes that had always reminded me of Margaret, the way she could look at you and make you feel both seen and accountable at the same time. "Your grandmother didn't predict any of this," I said. "I want you to understand that. She wasn't psychic. She wasn't lucky. She just paid attention for 40 years when the rest of us were too busy to." I picked up a piece of scrap wood and turned it in my hands, something to do with my fingers, while I found the right words. "She saw Nathan counting before he was grateful. She saw Carter apologizing before he'd done anything wrong. She saw Dominic choosing comfort over conscience every single time there was a choice to make. She watched all of it. She wrote it down, because she knew someday the truth was going to need somewhere to stand." Ryan's jaw tightened. His eyes were bright. "She built the whole thing before she left. She built it because she was leaving," I said. "That's the difference." He absorbed that. I watched it move through him, the full weight of it, the love underneath it, the particular grief of understanding that someone protected you at great cost, and you only find out after they're gone. "The recordings on the USB, he said. "Have you listened to all of them?" "All 11. "How bad?" I set the scrap wood down. "Bad enough that I understand now why she spent 2 years deciding whether to leave them. Good enough that I'm grateful she did." Ryan looked at the jewelry box on the bench between us, the half-finished maple one, pale and smooth, waiting for its final panel. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We wait for Philip," I said. "He's coming with the 4th envelope. But before that happens, I need to know something from you." I looked at him directly. "When Nathan offered you $50,000, what went through your head?" Ryan didn't hesitate. "I thought about what Grandma would say if I took it. And I put the envelope back on the table." My chest tightened, that specific, fierce tightening that isn't pain, exactly, more like the feeling of something being confirmed that you desperately needed confirmed. "She was right about you," I said. "She told me once, she said Ryan is the one who will choose correctly when it matters." I didn't fully understand what she meant until right now. Ryan's eyes filled. He pressed his lips together hard and looked up at the workshop ceiling for a moment, jaw working, blinking fast. Then he brought his gaze back down, and his voice came out rough but steady. "I just didn't want to be the kind of person she'd be ashamed of." "You never were," I said. "Not for a single day." Outside, that thin strip of November sun had widened, slightly more light, now coming in at a lower angle, turning the sawdust on the workbench floor to something almost golden. I picked up the sandpaper again. After a moment, Ryan reached across and took the second piece without asking, and we worked side by side in the quiet afternoon. And the workshop held us the way it always had, steady, warm smelling of wood and linseed oil, and 40 years of things built carefully by hand. 4 envelopes remained in the cedar box, and I had a feeling the hardest ones were still to come. I knew they'd met before I saw any evidence of it. It was the morning of the 13th day, and I came down to breakfast to find Nathan, Dominic, and Carter already at the kitchen table together, which in itself wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the specific quality of their conversation when I walked in. It stopped. Not the way conversations stop when someone enters a room and the topic simply changes. The way conversations stop when the person who just walked in is the subject. Nathan recovered first the way he always did. "Morning, Dad. Sleep okay?" "Well enough," I said, and went to pour my coffee and felt all 3 of them recalibrate behind my back. Ryan came down 20 minutes later, took one look at the tableau of his 3 uncles sitting in studied casualness around the kitchen table, and met my eyes across the room. I gave the smallest shake of my head. He poured himself coffee and sat down and said nothing. By noon, the invisible current running through the house had changed direction. Nathan had been on 3 separate calls that he'd taken outside walking the perimeter of the backyard, with his phone pressed close, his free hand moving in the emphatic gestures of a man making his case. Dominic had been in the guest room with the door shut, which from the outside produced the steady low percussion of a man typing very fast. Carter had been everywhere and nowhere, appearing at the edges of rooms, offering to make sandwiches, asking if anyone needed anything, his radar dish attentiveness turned up to its highest setting. Something had been decided. I just didn't know yet what. That evening at 7:30, I called them into the living room. Philip was already in his corner chair. Ryan took his position by the window. I opened the cedar box and removed the 3rd envelope. "Third letter," I said. "Margaret's rules, we read them in order." Nathan straightened his cuffs. Dominic set his phone face down on his knee. Carter arranged his face into its most receptive expression and folded his hands. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet and something else. A small rectangular object wrapped in bubble wrap taped shut. I set it aside and read the letter first. Margaret's handwriting was the same as always, careful, deliberate, slightly left-leaning. But the message was shorter than the previous 2, almost sparse. "Henry, there are men who believe that if something isn't witnessed, it didn't happen. These are usually men who have done things they'd prefer weren't witnessed. The item in this envelope will speak for itself. I love you, M." I folded the letter, unwrapped the small object. It was a USB drive, flat black, no larger than my thumbnail. I looked up at Philip. He was already opening his laptop. Nathan's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, barely visible, but I'd been watching that jaw for 46 years, and I knew exactly what it meant. Dominic's right thumb pressed into his palm. Carter's hands, still folded in his lap, laced their fingers together with slightly too much force. Philip inserted the USB. An audio file appeared. He clicked play. The recording was clear, better quality than I expected, which told me Margaret had planned the placement carefully. The voices were unmistakable. Nathan's voice came first. "We need to get ahead of this. Whatever she put in those letters, we need the old man to sign something before he reads all of them." "Dominic, you can't force him to sign anything. He's of sound mind." "Nathan, not if we manage his medication schedule. Carter's already, Carter, how long before the dosage starts affecting his decision-making more reliably?" A pause. Then Carter's voice, quieter but audible. "Another week, maybe 10 days, if we increase it. I've been keeping it low to avoid the doctor noticing." Philip pressed stop. The living room felt like the air had been evacuated from it. I set my hands flat on my knees and looked at my 3 sons. Nathan's face had gone the color of old chalk. Dominic had his eyes fixed on the middle distance with the glassy focus of a man doing rapid damage assessment. Carter was looking at the USB drive on Philip's laptop, like he was trying to calculate exactly how it had gotten there. "That was 2 nights ago," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The steadiness cost me something, but I paid it. "The night after I read the first letter." "Dad," Nathan started. "I haven't finished," I said. He closed his mouth. His throat moved as he swallowed. "I want to ask each of you something," I said. "And I want you to understand that I am 69 years old. I buried my wife 11 days ago, and I have exactly 0 patience remaining for anything that isn't the complete truth." I looked at Nathan first. "Did you go to Ryan's room and offer him money to falsify what he'd written in his journal?" Nathan's nostrils flared. "I was trying to protect." "Yes or no, Nathan?" A beat. "Yes." I looked at Dominic. "Did you access my financial records without my permission to determine the scope of the estate?" Dominic's jaw shifted. "I was making sure everything was properly accounted. Yes or no?" "Yes." I looked at Carter last. Carter, who had brought me tea every morning. Carter, who had pressed his hand to my shoulder and said, "I'm not going anywhere." Carter, who had sat in this room 11 days ago and let tears form in his eyes when Margaret's letter mentioned someone doing harm. Carter looked back at me, and for just a moment, just one unguarded moment, the warmth dropped off his face like a coat he'd been wearing too long and had finally gotten tired of carrying. Then it came back, softer this time, more careful. "Dad," he said, "I want you to understand that everything I did because I was worried about you. The medication was just, I was trying to help you sleep, to help you get through the grief. I would never—" "Carter," I said. His name in my mouth felt like something I was setting down, something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing. "I know exactly what was in my tea. I know exactly how long it's been in there. And I know that what you just described is not what was on that recording." Carter's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted to Ryan just once, just briefly, and whatever he saw there made him look away again quickly. Ryan was watching his youngest uncle with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger exactly. Something colder than anger. The expression of someone who has decided to bear witness and will not look away. "You can all go," I said. Nathan stood up, and the movement was stiff with something that wasn't quite dignity. "We're going to need to discuss this properly," he said. "As a family. Not like this." "Good night, Nathan," I said. He walked out. Dominic followed without speaking. His face back behind its professional mask, already processing, already strategizing, already 3 moves ahead on a board that was rapidly running out of squares. Carter stood last. He looked at me one more time, and the look on his face then was different from all the others. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't performing. For just that one moment, standing in the doorway of his father's living room, Carter looked like what he actually was, a man who had made choices he couldn't undo, standing in front of someone who had just made clear that he understood exactly what those choices were. He left without saying anything. Philip closed his laptop. Ryan exhaled from the window chair, a long breath that had been held too long, releasing with the particular relief of someone who has been very, very tense for a very long time. "Grandpa," he said. His voice was rough. "Are you okay?" My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with scopolamine. I pressed my fist against my sternum once briefly, like that would help. "Ask me again in the morning," I said. Ryan nodded. He looked at the USB drive still sitting in Philip's laptop. Then he looked at the cedar box, 4 envelopes remaining. "Who recorded them?" he asked. "How did she get it into the envelope if she was already—" Margaret installed a small voice-activated recording device in the living room 2 months before she died, Philip said quietly. It uploaded automatically to a private cloud account she had set up. She gave me the access credentials. I retrieved the file the week after the funeral. He paused. She left very detailed instructions. Ryan looked at Philip for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. Not in disbelief, in something closer to awe. She thought of everything, he said. Philip looked at the cedar box. She had a great deal of time, he said, and she used it well. Outside, I could hear the sound of Nathan's rental car starting in the driveway, the engine turning over headlights, sweeping briefly across the living room wall, then disappearing down Eastbrook Drive. I looked at the 4 envelopes still waiting in the box and thought, wherever you are, Margaret, I hope you can see this. The 14th morning after the funeral came in without rain for once, though. Portland never means it by noon. The clouds were already reforming on the west side of the hills, like a slow army regrouping. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Dominic knocked on the back door. He didn't wait for me to answer. He let himself in, which told me immediately that whatever was in his hands couldn't hold. "Sit down, Dad. I'm already standing. Please." His voice caught on that word, the voice of a man who has practiced courtrooms and depositions and never once let his tone show the seams. It was showing them now. I sat. Dominic set a manila folder on the table. Not thick, maybe 20 pages, but the way he placed it made it feel like a brick. Nathan moved $400,000 out of Caldwell Woodworks in March. 3 separate transfers, each one just under the federal reporting threshold. The coffee in my cup went cold without me touching it. My right hand tightened on the edge of the table. "Show me," I said. He opened the folder. Bank transfer records, account numbers, dates. I'm not a finance man. I know wood. I know joints and grain and how timber behaves under load. But I know my own company, and I know the number $134,900, repeated 3 times across 3 weeks, means someone was trying to stay invisible. "Where did it go?" I asked. "A holding LLC registered in Nevada. I only found it because I pulled the quarterly audit Margaret had requested before she got sick." She started it. She never finished it. My throat burned. Margaret had known. Or she'd suspected. She'd set the audit in motion, and then the cancer had taken her before she could see it through. "Does Nathan know you have this?" "Not yet." I closed the folder. "Call Philip. I want him here when I talk to Nathan, and Ryan stays out of this room until I say otherwise." Philip arrived within 40 minutes. He came through the front door with his briefcase and that careful expression he uses when situations have already gone somewhere difficult. "Henry, I should tell you I have the 4th envelope with me. Margaret specified it was to be opened if financial misconduct was discovered." Those were her exact words. The 4 of us, myself, Philip, Dominic, and Nathan, who I'd called up from the garage where he'd been making himself comfortable rebuilding a carburetor he had no business touching, gathered in the dining room. I set the manila folder in the center of the table. Nathan's eyes went to it. Something behind his face shifted quick, almost imperceptible, like a man adjusting his footing on wet ground. "What's this?" he said. "You know what this is," I said. "Dad, I can explain." "Sit down, Nathan." He sat. His jaw was working like he was chewing on the opening sentence of an argument he hadn't fully constructed yet. His hands went flat on the table, and I noticed his knuckles were white. "The money was a loan," he said. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed time to—" "You moved it in 3 pieces." Dominic cut in, his voice steady and cold as riverstone. "Just under the threshold each time. That's not a loan. That's a structure." Nathan's face flushed a dark, ugly red that started at his collar and climbed. "You went through my accounts. You went through the company books behind my back." "Behind whose back?" I said. "It's my company, Nathan, mine and your mother's. She started that audit. I finished it." The silence that tried to settle over the table, I wouldn't let it. "Philip," I said. "The envelope." Philip set it on the table. White sealed Margaret's handwriting on the front letter 4. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt the tremor in my chest, but not my fingers. I broke the seal and read aloud, "Henry, if you're reading this, then something I feared has been confirmed. I'm not writing this to punish anyone. I'm writing it because the truth doesn't become less true if we pretend not to see it. You deserve to know what was taken, and you deserve to decide what to do about it. All my love, Margaret." Nathan's face had gone from red to a shade of chalk that made him look 10 years older. His bottom lip moved once before any sound came out. She knew, she suspected, I said. She loved you anyway. That was her great flaw and her greatest strength. His eyes went wet, and something crumbled behind them. The boardroom confidence, the expensive suit, all of it, and for just a moment, he looked like the 12-year-old boy who broke my workshop window and spent a week working up the nerve to tell me. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I know," I said. "We're not done yet." 3 envelopes remained in that cedar box, and I had a feeling the hardest ones hadn't been opened yet. The 17th morning, I woke up at 5:40 with no dizziness, no fog behind my eyes, and realized that was the first clear-headed morning I'd had in over a week. I didn't touch the tea. Ryan found me in the workshop at 6:30, mug of black coffee in each hand, still wearing the flannel shirt he'd slept in. "Grandpa." He set one mug down in front of me. "I need to show you something, and I need you to keep your voice level when you see it." My chest tightened, that slow, specific tightening I'd come to associate with things I wasn't going to be able to unfeel. "All right," I said. He pulled out his phone. Small, rectangular, the kind of clip-on camera lens they sell at electronics stores. He'd mounted it inside the cabinet above the kettle, angled down, pointed directly at the counter. "I installed it 4 days ago," he said, after the lab results. He pressed play. The timestamp read 6:14 a.m., day 15. The kitchen was still dark except for the under-cabinet light. Carter came in barefoot, wearing the gray sweatshirt he always wore in the mornings. He filled the kettle. He set out my cup, the one with the chipped handle Margaret always said I should throw away. Then he reached into the front pocket of his sweatshirt and removed a small glass vial, thumb-sized, no label. He tipped it. 2 drops into the chamomile blend already waiting in the strainer. He stirred it with his finger, put the vial back into his pocket, and waited for the kettle to boil like a man with nothing to hide. My hand, the one holding the mug, started shaking so badly I had to set it down. Ryan watched me and didn't say a word, which was its own kind of kindness. "How long?" I managed. "I think since day 8, maybe before. I don't know." The pain that moved through me wasn't physical. It was something structural, the way a beam feels when the joint it's been resting on for 40 years finally gives. Carter, my youngest. The one who called me Ba and cried at his mother's casket and brought grocery store dahlias because he was always trying to catch up to the right gesture. "He's been making your tea every morning," Ryan said, and his voice had gone quiet and careful. The voice of someone carrying something they know is fragile. I checked the vial online. The compound matches what showed up in the lab sample. "Scopolamine," I said. "Yes." I pushed back from the workbench and stood up. The floor felt less solid than it should have. "Does Carter know you installed the camera?" "No." "Good, don't tell him. Don't tell Nathan or Dominic either." Ryan's jaw set hard. "Grandpa, we need to." "Ryan." My voice came out low but firm, the way Margaret used to say my name when she needed me to stop and think instead of react. "I've got 2 envelopes left in that box. Your grandmother planned every step of this. If she built a door for this moment, I want to open it her way." He pressed his lips together. His eyes were bright and angry and hurting all at once, the face of someone who loves you and hates watching you be patient when the situation calls for rage. "She trusted you," he said finally. "She trusted both of us," I said. That evening, Carter made dinner. Chicken soup, good bread, the kind of meal that says "I love you" in every stir of the spoon. He set a bowl in front of me with both hands, and that familiar searching look in his eyes, the one that always wanted to be forgiven for something he hadn't told me yet. "Eat, Dad. You need to keep your strength up." I looked at the bowl. I looked at him. "Thank you, Carter," I said, and I ate every bite, because I needed him to believe nothing had changed. Not yet. Not until Margaret's 5th envelope told me it was time, but I didn't touch the tea. The 20th morning after Margaret's funeral came in cold and sharp, the kind of November cold that gets into the joints and stays there. I made my own coffee, black no tea, and I called all four of them to the dining room before 8 o'clock. Philip Hartman was already at the table, briefcase, open, fifth envelope centered in front of him, like a verdict waiting to be read. Nathan came in first, still buttoning his cuff. Dominic followed, face composed and unreadable the way it always was when he sensed something significant was happening. Carter was last. He'd made a fresh pot of chamomile and carried 2 mugs, and one for himself, one for me, and set mine down with that familiar gentle motion, that particular tenderness that had been making me ache for days. "Sit down, Carter," I said. "Leave the tea." He looked at the mug, then at me. "Dad, it'll get cold." "Sit down." Something in my voice reached him. He pulled out the chair and sat, both hands wrapping around his own mug knuckles, whitening at the rim. Philip folded his hands on the table. "Henry asked me here this morning to open the 5th letter. As with the others, this was prepared by Margaret and sealed in my custody. Henry, whenever you're ready." I picked up the envelope. Margaret's handwriting on the front, neat, unhurried, the same cursive she'd used in every birthday card and grocery list for 43 years. My thumb ran along the seal once before I broke it. "Henry," I read aloud. "If this letter has been opened, then you've spent the last 3 weeks watching and waiting, and I imagine that has cost you something. So let me give you something back. You are not sick. You were never sick. What Dr. Brooks has been treating is real. The symptoms are real, but the cause isn't grief. The cause is in your kitchen. I couldn't name it while I was alive because I didn't have proof. I only had a feeling, and a feeling isn't enough to accuse a child. But you, Henry, you'll find the proof. You always do. All my love, Margaret." The room went absolutely electric. Nathan's chair scraped back 2 inches. "What is she saying?" Dominic's eyes cut straight to Carter. Carter's face went through something terrible. A collapse, slow and total, like a wall that's been holding back water, finally giving way at the base. His hands came off the mug. His chin dropped to his chest. "Carter." My voice was low. Even. I had been practicing it in my head for 3 days. "Tell me about the tea." He made a sound, not words yet, just a raw, broken sound from somewhere deep in his chest. His shoulders heaved once. "Dad, The vial, Carter, in your sweatshirt pocket. Day 15, 6:14 in the morning. I need you to tell me what was in it." The color left his face so completely that his lips went gray. His eyes shot to Ryan, who was standing in the doorway because I'd told him to stay back, and who was gripping the door frame with one hand so hard I could see the strain in his forearm. "You know," Carter whispered. "I've known for 3 days," I said. "I've been drinking your coffee and eating your soup and saying thank you because I needed to look you in the eye when I asked. So I'm asking. What was in the vial?" Carter's eyes filled not the soft, apologetic tears of the funeral, but something awful and flooding the tears of a man drowning in what he's done. His whole body shook. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you," he said. I needed time. I needed you to be confused long enough for Nathan and Dominic to sort out the estate before you. I said. Before I noticed what Nathan took from the company. Before I read your mother's letters." Nathan was on his feet. "Carter, you asked me to." Carter's voice tore apart at the seams, ragged and desperate, the cry of someone who has been carrying a secret until the weight has warped everything beneath it. "You told me it was just something to slow him down. You said it was harmless. You said, Nathan, you told me. I never told you to drug him." Nathan's fist hit the table, and the mugs jumped. "Don't you dare put that on me." "Enough!" Philip's voice was not loud, but it landed like a hand on a shoulder, firm and immovable. "Gentlemen, enough!" The room heaved and settled. I looked at Carter. He was folded over himself in the chair, both hands pressed over his mouth, shaking so hard the chair was vibrating against the floor. 39 years old, and he looked like a child who had knocked over something irreplaceable and knew it couldn't be put back. My heart, God, my heart. I wanted to go to him. That was the worst part. I wanted to cross the room and put my hand on the back of his neck and tell him we'd figure it out. That's what 40 years of fatherhood does to you. It doesn't disappear just because the thing someone has done is unforgivable. Ryan, I said. Yeah, come sit with me. He crossed the room and took the chair beside me, and I put my hand flat on the table between us, not touching, just present. And I looked at Carter one more time. We are not finished, I said, but we're done for this morning. Philip closed his briefcase. 2 envelopes remained, and somewhere outside the cold November sky just kept pressing down, indifferent and patient. The way truth always is, it never rushes. It simply waits until there's nowhere left to hide. 21 days after we buried Margaret, a Portland Police Department patrol car pulled up in front of the house at 10:30 in the morning. I was in the workshop when Ryan came through the side door at a half-run, his face stripped of color, his breathing short. Grandpa, there's a cop at the front door. They're asking for me. My stomach dropped like a stone off a bridge. Don't say a word, I said. Not one word until Philip gets here. I pulled out my phone and called Philip before I even reached the back hallway. He picked up on the second ring. Philip, someone called the police on Ryan. They're at the door right now. A beat of quiet on his end then. Don't let him speak to anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Henry, do not open that door until I arrive. I pocketed the phone and found Nathan at the top of the staircase, arms folded, watching the front door with an expression that was so carefully neutral it told me everything. Dominic was in the kitchen doorway. Carter was nowhere. Nathan, I said. My voice came out flat and cold the way metal sounds in January. Did you call them? His jaw shifted. Ryan had access to the company accounts. Someone had to report. Ryan is 22 years old, and he does not have signatory access to anything in that company. His name appeared on a transfer because someone put it there. The color in Nathan's face did something complicated. He dropped his arms to his sides and looked away, not the look of a guilty man exactly, more the look of a man who made a calculated move and is only now watching the consequences take shape in a way he hadn't fully projected. The knock at the front door came again, 2 firm raps. Stay here, I told Ryan. I went to the door and opened it. 2 officers. Young professional, the kind of polite that means they've been trained to stay pleasant until they can't. The taller one had a notepad already in hand. Mr. Caldwell, we received a report of potential financial irregularities involving a Ryan Caldwell. Is he present? He is, I said, and his attorney will be here in 15 minutes. You're welcome to wait on the porch. The officer's expression didn't change. Sir, it would help to... 15 minutes, I said. I'm 69 years old. I've lived in this neighborhood for 31 years, and I know my rights and his. 15 minutes. I closed the door. My hands were shaking not with fear, but with the particular tremor that comes when you are furious and forcing yourself to stay controlled, because losing control helps no one. Ryan was at the end of the hallway. His back was against the wall, one hand pressed flat against it like he needed something solid to lean against. His eyes were wide and bright and afraid. And God, that look on his face, that raw, unguarded fear on a 22-year-old who had already lost more than most people lose in a lifetime. It split something open in my chest that I won't fully describe because I don't have the words for it. Am I going to be arrested? He asked. No, I said. How do you know? Because Philip has documentation showing the transfer was made from Nathan's device at Nathan's IP address at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when you were documented on the other side of town at a college friend's apartment. Philip prepared it last week the moment he saw where things were heading. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. Then his eyes went wet, and he made a sound that was almost a laugh, the kind that comes out of relief so complete it feels physical. She planned for this too. She planned for everything, I said. Philip arrived in 18 minutes, not 15, and he was carrying his briefcase and a second folder I hadn't seen before, thicker, rubber-banded. He spoke to the officers on the porch for 9 minutes. I watched through the sidelights. The taller officer's posture changed around minute 4 shoulders, dropping notepad going into his breast pocket. When Philip came back inside, he was composed, but his eyes were bright. "They're leaving. The report has been noted and will be investigated, but given the documentary evidence, Ryan is not a person of interest." Nathan had come downstairs. He was standing at the foot of the staircase with his hands in his pockets and his face doing that neutral boardroom thing, but his left foot was moving, heel lifting and dropping in a small, rapid rhythm that I recognized from when he was 16 and had done something he couldn't take back. "Nathan," Philip said, "I'd strongly recommend you speak with your own attorney before tomorrow morning." Nathan said nothing, but his foot kept moving. Dominic had come into the hallway by then. He looked at Nathan, then at me, and his face did something I hadn't seen it do in years. It cracked just slightly, just at the eyes, the way a man looks when he realizes the story he told himself about his own behavior no longer holds its shape. "Henry," he said, "I didn't know about the police call. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. Carter appeared at the top of the stairs. He'd been crying, his face was swollen and raw, and he gripped the banister with both hands, like the stairs might give way beneath him. He looked at Ryan for a long moment, and his lips pressed together, and his chin dropped. "Ryan, Not yet, Carter," I said. "Not yet." Because there were still 2 envelopes in that cedar box, and whatever Margaret had put in them, I had a feeling that the apologies, if they were going to mean anything at all, needed to wait until every truth was on the table. Philip set his briefcase down and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Henry, are you ready for the 6th letter?" My chest tightened. My hands steadied. "Tomorrow," I said. "Give us 1 night." He nodded. Outside, the police car pulled away from the curb, and the street went quiet, and the afternoon light came through the front window and caught the dust motes floating in the air of my hallway. All these invisible things drifting, waiting to settle. Because what I'm about to tell you is the one thing that changed everything. The one secret that explains 8 years of silence in this family. The one truth Ryan never knew and deserved to know more than anyone. If you think you already know what's coming, comment "I know" below. And if you have no idea, comment "Tell me." Either way, let me see you before I turn this page. A reminder, as we head into the hardest part of this story, some details here are fictional, built carefully to carry a message that is worth hearing. If you'd rather not continue, you can step away right now, no explanation needed. But if you stay, what comes next will stay with you. The 23rd morning after we put Margaret in the ground, I woke up before the sun and sat at the kitchen table, with my hands flat on the wood, and just breathed. Philip was due at 9. I'd asked Ryan to be present. I'd told the 3 boys to be downstairs by 9 or not at all. They were all there by 8:50. Carter sat closest to the window, a mug of coffee between his palms, eyes red-rimmed and swollen from what I suspected had been a sleepless night. Dominic was next to him, posture straight, face composed, but his right hand kept turning his pen over and over on the tabletop in a slow, repetitive motion that told me everything his face was trying not to. Nathan sat at the far end, and for the first time since Margaret's funeral, he looked diminished, smaller somehow, like a man who has been holding a particular shape for so long that when the effort finally stops, what's left is just the ordinary person underneath. Ryan came in last and took the chair beside me. Philip set the 6th envelope on the table at exactly 9 o'clock. He didn't say anything. He just placed it in front of me and folded his hands and waited. I picked it up. Margaret's handwriting. Letter 6. I felt the weight of it between my fingers and thought, whatever is in here, she chose to write it. She chose to leave it. That means she decided the truth was worth more than the peace of not saying it. I broke the seal. "Henry," I read. My voice was steady, which surprised me. There are things I knew and could not prove. There are things I suspected and could not say. But I have been gone long enough now that the time for protecting feelings has passed and the time for protecting Ryan has arrived. So I will say it plainly. The night Marcus and Dana died the accident on the Terwilliger curves, Nathan called Marcus 40 seconds before the crash. I have the phone records. I have had them for 2 years. I do not know what was said. I do not know if Nathan intended what happened. But I know that Dominic knew about the call, and I know that Carter saw Nathan on the phone that night and said nothing. I am not asking you to punish them, Henry. I am asking you to see them clearly, and I am asking you to make sure Ryan knows the truth, not to give him a reason for hatred, but to give him the dignity of not being the only one kept in the dark. All my love, Margaret. The pen stopped turning. Dominic's hand went flat on the table, like he needed to anchor himself to something solid. Carter made a sound sharp, involuntary, the sound a person makes when something strikes them in the sternum. His coffee mug tipped and he caught it, but just barely, and his hand was shaking so hard the coffee sloshed over the rim and onto his fingers. Nathan said nothing for a long moment. Then his jaw moved. I wasn't trying to... His voice broke on the last word. He pressed his fist against his mouth. His eyes went bright and wet, and something behind them was falling. I could see it falling, the whole careful architecture of justification and distance he had built over 8 years coming apart in the space of 30 seconds. I called him about the estate, about a property matter. I didn't know, I swear to God, Dad, I did not know he would. Did you know he was driving? I asked. Nathan's fist dropped from his mouth. His chin trembled. Yes. The word hit the room like a dropped hammer. Ryan's hand came down on the table. Hard. Not a slam, controlled, deliberate, the sound of a young man using every ounce of himself to stay seated. You knew he was driving, Ryan said. His voice was low and stripped of everything except the raw fact of it. You knew he was driving and you called anyway. Ryan, don't. Ryan's eyes were blazing, not tears, yet something hotter than tears, something that had been waiting 8 years for a place to land. Don't say my name like that. Don't say it like we're okay. Nathan's shoulders came forward. He put both elbows on the table and pressed his face into his hands, and the sound that came out of him was terrible and formless. The sound of a man who has been outrunning something for 8 years and has finally run out of road. I looked at Dominic. You knew about the call. Dominic met my eyes. His jaw was set. His voice was controlled, but the skin at his temples was tight, and his knuckles on the table were white. I found out 6 months after. Nathan told me. I told him to go to the police. He said there was nothing to report. It was a phone call, not a crime. And you accepted that. I accepted that. His voice dropped. I've spent 8 years not accepting it. But I accepted it. I looked at Carter. Carter was crying fully, crying, no pretense, tears running down his face, unchecked shoulders, heaving in silent, awful waves. I saw him on the phone, Carter said. I didn't know who he was calling. I didn't find out until months later when Nathan told Dominic and Dominic told me. And I should have. I don't know why I... His voice dissolved entirely. He pressed both hands over his eyes like he could hold himself together by force. Ryan pushed back from the table. He stood up, and for a moment his legs seemed uncertain beneath him, his hand shooting out to grip the back of his chair. He was 22 years old, and he had just learned that his father's last living seconds were interrupted by a phone call from a man sitting 8 feet away from him. Ryan, I said. He looked at me. His face was devastated, stripped open, every layer gone, and his eyes were full and spilling over. And I thought, this boy has been carrying an orphan's grief for 8 years, without knowing it had a shape, without knowing it had a cause. And now he has both. I need a minute, he said. Take what you need, I said. I'll be here. He walked out through the back door into the cold morning, and Philip watched him go, and the five of us who remained sat with the weight of what Margaret had finally said, and it pressed down on that room like weather. "What happens now?" Dominic asked. I picked up the cedar box. One envelope remained. "Now," I said, "we find out what she saved for last." I found Ryan in the workshop at 7:30 the next morning, the 24th day. He hadn't come back inside until well after midnight, and when he did, he went straight upstairs without stopping in the kitchen, and I'd sat at the table for another hour, just listening to the house settle around the fact of what we now all knew. The workshop smelled the way it always did, sawdust and linseed oil, and the particular sweetness of the pine boards I'd been aging in the corner for 2 years. Ryan was sitting on the old stool at the end of the main bench, hands wrapped around a thermos, staring at a half-finished jewelry box I'd been building for no particular reason, except that my hands needed something to do when my head wouldn't quiet. I didn't announce myself. I just walked in, pulled the second stool out from under the bench, and sat down across from him. "Your hands look better," he said without looking up. "No tremor this morning. Dr. Brooks said 2 more weeks and it'll be fully out of my system," I said. He nodded. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the jewelry box, like it had done something to him personally. "You want to talk about it?" I asked. "I've been talking to myself about it all night," he said. "I'm not sure I have any new sentences left." "Then don't use sentences, just talk." He looked up at me then. His eyes were raw, not crying anymore, past the crying stage into the quiet aftermath where everything is level and exhausted and honest. "Did you know?" he asked. "Before the letter. Did you know about the phone call?" The question landed squarely, and I let it. "No," I said. "I knew something happened that night that was never fully explained. Your father was a careful driver. The conditions weren't that bad. I never understood the mechanics of it. But I didn't know about the call." Ryan's chest rose and fell. 8 years, he said. 8 years I thought it was just an accident. Just the random cruelty of it. And the whole time, his voice cracked. He pressed the back of his wrist against his mouth, hard, jaw tight, fighting it. And then he stopped fighting it, and his eyes filled and spilled over, and he bent forward over the thermos with his shoulders shaking. And I got off my stool and crossed to him and put both hands on his shoulders and held on. He cried the way people cry when they've been holding it back for hours in waves, each one harder than the last, his whole frame shaking with it. I didn't say anything. I just kept my hands on his shoulders and let him. When it passed slowly, unevenly, he straightened up and dragged his sleeve across his face and let out a long, ragged breath. "I don't know what to do with it," he said. "I don't know if I'm supposed to forgive him, or hate him, or report him, or—" "You're not supposed to do anything," I said. "Not today, not this week. Grief doesn't run on a schedule, and neither does what you're feeling right now." He looked at me sideways. "That sounds like something Grandma would say. She said it to me once," I said, "when your dad was in the hospital after the appendix surgery, and I was trying to figure out how to feel and what to do next, all at the same time. She sat me down and said, 'Henry, you don't have to have a plan for every feeling.'" Something shifted in Ryan's face. The grief was still there, raw and present, but underneath it something else moved, something softer. "I miss her," he said. "God, I miss her," I said. We sat with that for a moment. The two of us in the workshop that smelled like sawdust and old pine while the 24th morning came in gray and quiet through the high window above the lathe. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said. "Always. Are you scared of whatever's in the last envelope?" I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, the way Margaret always told me to before answering a real question. "Yes," I said. "But I'm more scared of not opening it than opening it. Does that make sense?" Ryan turned the thermos in his hands. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it does." He looked at the half-finished jewelry box between us on the bench. After a moment, he reached out and ran 2 fingers along the edge of the lid, testing the joint, the way I'd taught him years ago, feeling for gaps, for unevenness, for the places where the fit wasn't quite right yet. You going to finish this? He asked. Eventually, I said. What's it for? I looked at it. The wood was maple pale and close-grained, the kind that takes detail well. I don't know yet, I said. Sometimes you build a thing and the reason shows up later. Ryan almost smiled. The corners of his mouth moved, not fully, not yet, but the shape of it was there. Philip's coming at noon, I said. Last envelope. I know. He straightened on the stool, squared his shoulders, the gesture of someone gathering themselves back into their own shape after being taken apart. I'll be there. I know you will, I said. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and turned to the jewelry box and started on the second panel. Ryan watched me for a minute, then reached across and picked up the other piece of sandpaper without asking. We worked side by side in the sawdust-smelling morning, the two of us, and outside the November light came through the window at a low angle and turned everything golden for about 4 minutes before the clouds closed back over. 4 minutes was enough. Philip arrived at noon on the 25th day, exactly the way Philip always arrived, punctual, to the point where you started to wonder if he sat in his car and waited for the clock to turn. He came through the front door with his briefcase and a second leather portfolio I hadn't seen before, and he shook my hand at the door with both of his, which told me this visit was going to be different from the ones before. The 5 of us gathered in the dining room for the last time. Nathan at one end of the table, Dominic beside him, Carter at the corner closest to the window. Ryan sat on my right. Philip took the seat at the other end, the seat Margaret used to occupy, and he opened his briefcase and set the 7th envelope on the table. It was thinner than the others. Before I hand this to Henry, Philip said, I want to read a brief statement from Margaret, which she asked me to deliver verbally before the letter is opened. He unfolded a single sheet of paper. She wrote, I have spent 43 years watching this family. I know what each of you is capable of at your best. I also know what each of you has done when you thought no one was looking. This letter is not a punishment. It is the last honest thing I can give you. Please receive it as such. Carter's eyes were already filling. He pressed his lips together hard and turned his face toward the window. I picked up the 7th envelope. My hands were steadier than I expected, steadier than they'd been in weeks. I broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. Henry, I read. 6 months before I died, I moved the majority of our estate into the Margaret and Henry Caldwell Charitable Trust. The trust holds $6,200,000. It is administered by Hartman and Associates and governed by a board of 3 independent directors. It is no longer inheritable. It cannot be contested. The assets remaining in the estate, the house on Beaumont, the workshop property, and $200,000 in savings, are yours to dispose of as you see fit. I made this decision because I watched our sons spend the better part of a decade measuring each other by what they stood to gain. I did not want our life's work to become the thing that finished us. The money is doing good now. It is building a pediatric wing at Providence Memorial and funding 3 years of college scholarships for kids who need them. I am more proud of that than anything I owned. What I want you to give Ryan is not money. It is the truth, and a chair at whatever table this family builds next, if it builds one at all. I love you, Henry. I love all of you, even now, especially now. Margaret. The room went so still I could hear the furnace cycling on 2 floors below. Then Nathan made a sound, half breath, half something else, and his chair pushed back from the table by 3 inches. His face was a battlefield. His jaw was working. His eyes were bright and wet and furious all at once, and his hands came flat on the table with a sound like a single short crack. $6 million, he said. She gave it away. She built something with it, I said. Dad, Nathan. My voice was quiet, final. Don't. Dominic had gone very still. His pen was flat on the table. His face had done that thing it did when he was processing something too large for his usual composure. A kind of controlled blankness, like a man standing in a doorway, deciding whether to walk through. Carter was crying openly. Not the heaving sobs of the night before, quieter than that, more defeated, the tears of someone who has run out of fight and is just letting the truth sit on top of him. Ryan had not moved. He was looking at Philip. "The house," he said. "The workshop, the 200,000. What happens to those?" "Henry decides," Philip said, "per Margaret's instruction." Ryan turned to me. His eyes were calm, that particular stillness he got sometimes, that reminded me of Margaret, the way she could be the eye of a storm. "Grandpa," he said, "I don't want any of it." Nathan's head came up. "Ryan, I'm not saying that for your benefit," Ryan said, turning to Nathan with a directness that made Nathan blink. "I'm saying it because it's true. I don't want the house. I don't want the money. I want—" His voice caught just slightly, just for a second. "I want what I already have. I want the workshop. I want Sunday mornings. I want him." He looked at me. "That's it. That's the whole list." My throat sealed itself shut. My eyes burned. I have not cried in front of my sons since Marcus's funeral, and I was not going to start now, but the burning behind my eyes was something fierce, and I had to press my thumb and forefinger to the bridge of my nose for a long moment before I could trust my voice. "The workshop is yours," I said. "It's always been yours." Ryan's chin trembled once. He pressed his fist against his mouth, the same gesture Nathan used, I noticed, and thought blood runs in stranger channels than we imagine. Then he straightened up and nodded. "Okay," he said. Philip cleared his throat. "There is one more matter," he said. "Margaret specified a trustee for the charitable trust. Someone to serve as the family's representative on the board, not to control the funds, but to ensure the trust's original intent is honored. She named that person in a codicil to the trust agreement." He opened the leather portfolio and slid a single document across the table. The name at the top was Ryan Caldwell. Nathan's exhale was sharp and audible. Dominic blinked twice, which for Dominic was the equivalent of dropping a plate. Carter made a sound that was almost a laugh, broken and bewildered, and something else underneath. Ryan stared at the document. His hand moved toward it, then stopped. "She chose me," he said. "Not a question, just the fact of it landing." "She chose you," Philip confirmed. Ryan looked at me. I looked at him. And in 43 years of marriage and 69 years of living, I had never been more certain of anything than I was in that moment, that Margaret had known exactly what she was doing every step of the way from the very beginning. "I'll need to think about it," Ryan said. "Take your time," Philip said. "The trust isn't going anywhere." Outside, a December rain had started, soft, unhurried, the kind that settles in for the long run. The first real rain of winter. I thought about Margaret standing at the kitchen window, watching the rain the way she always did, coffee cup in both hands, perfectly at peace in the presence of weather. I thought she planned this too. She planned all of it. And for the first time in 25 days, I felt something that wasn't grief. The afternoon of the 25th day stretched long and complicated. Philip stayed another 2 hours. There were documents to review, signatures to initial a formal reading of the estate inventory that reduced everything Margaret and I had built over 40 years to 7 pages of single-spaced text. Nathan read every line. Dominic read every line faster. Carter didn't read any of it. He sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the middle distance and let the afternoon happen around him. Ryan had stepped outside after the trust document came out. He was on the back porch when I found him leaning against the railing, with his face tipped up toward the gray sky, rain just barely reaching him under the overhang. "You doing all right?" I asked. "I'm trying to decide something," he said. "The trustee position." "Yeah." He brought his head down. "It's $300,000 a year in administrative fees. Did you know that?" Philip mentioned it. "That's a lot of money, Grandpa." "It is. I don't think I should take it." I leaned against the railing beside him. The rain came down in the yard in a steady curtain, and a robin sat on the fence post at the edge of the garden, looking completely unbothered by any of it. "Tell me why," I said. "Because if I take the money," Ryan said, "then every time I make a decision for the trust, Nathan and Dominic will say it's about the fees. They'll find a way to make it about that. And the trust it'll be polluted. Grandma's thing will be polluted." He turned to look at me, and his jaw was set, and his eyes were clear and certain, in the way of someone who has already made a decision and is just saying it out loud to make sure it's real. "I'll serve as trustee. I'll do the work, but I'm declining the fee." I looked at him for a long moment. "Your grandmother," I said, "is somewhere very smug right now." A laugh burst out of Ryan, sudden, genuine surprise out of him, and it was the best sound I'd heard in 25 days. He pressed his hand over his mouth like he was startled by his own reaction, and then the laugh faded into something softer, and his eyes went bright again, but differently bright this time. "Let's go tell Philip," he said. Back inside, Philip received the news with the particular stillness of a man who had expected it. He made a note, nodded once, and said, "Margaret will be pleased." He said it in the present tense. Nobody corrected him. Nathan, however, was not still. He was on his feet at the side window, and when Ryan announced his decision, Nathan turned around with his arms crossed and his face doing something complicated. Surprise, calculation, and something underneath both of those that I hadn't seen on Nathan's face in years. Something that might have been shame. "You're turning down $300,000, Nathan said. "Yes," Ryan said. "Why?" "Because it's not mine." Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. His arms dropped to his sides. And for a moment, just a moment, the boardroom version of my oldest son went away entirely. And what was left was a 50-year-old man who had spent a very long time confusing worth with wealth, and who was only now standing in his dead mother's dining room, beginning to understand the difference. Philip cleared his throat. "There is a final matter I need to address." He opened a tab in the leather portfolio and slid 2 documents across the table. "These relate to the $300,000 transfer from Caldwell Woodworks. Oregon law requires formal disclosure. I've been in contact with the company's accountant. Dominic, you provided Nathan with legal cover for the transfer structure. That's documented." Philip set the portfolio down and looked at me. "There is one additional matter. Regarding Carter, the substance found in the tea has been documented and submitted to the Portland Police Bureau. Carter will need his own legal counsel. That process is separate from what we're resolving here today, and it will run on its own timeline." Dominic's composure finally cracked. Not dramatically, not the way Carter's had, not the way Nathan's had, but in the specific way of a man who has kept himself together through discipline alone and has just felt that discipline give at the foundation. His face went pale. His hands came to the table edge. "I advised on the structure," he said carefully. "I did not authorize. The advice created the mechanism," Philip said. "The documentation is very clear." "What does that mean?" Nathan said. "Philip, what exactly does that?" "It means," Philip said with the measured patience of a man who has been carrying this information for 6 months and is finally setting it down, "that both of you will need independent legal counsel. And it means that restitution to the company and by extension to Henry will need to be arranged before the estate closes." The room crackled. Nathan's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Dominic was absolutely motionless, his eyes fixed on Philip, with the precise, calculating focus of a lawyer trying to find the exit from a room that has no exits. Carter was the one who spoke first. "I want to say something." Every head turned. Carter was standing. He'd gotten to his feet without anyone noticing, and he was standing at the corner of the table, with both hands gripping the back of his chair. Knuckles white, chin up, eyes red and swollen and absolutely direct. "I want to say it to Ryan," he said. Ryan looked at him. Carter's grip on the chair tightened until the tendons stood out along the backs of his hands. His voice came out uneven, cracked at the edges, but he didn't stop. "I put something into your grandfather's tea," he said. "I told myself it wasn't serious. I told myself it was just temporary. I told myself a lot of things. His voice broke on the next sentence, and he pushed through it anyway. I heard him. And you sat in this house every day watching him get worse and trying to protect him. And you did it alone because nobody else would. And I was the one making him sick. His chin dropped. His shoulders shook once. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to. I needed you to hear it. From me. Without any of the other stuff around it. Ryan's hands were flat on the table. His jaw was working. His eyes were full, brimming right at the edge. I hear you, he said. Carter nodded. He sat back down. He put his face in his hands. And I sat at the head of the table, in the house Margaret and I had shared for 31 years. And I looked at my sons, all three of them, each broken in their own particular way. And I thought about what she'd written. I love you. Even now. Especially now. I didn't know if they deserved that, but she had given it anyway. Philip closed the portfolio. I'll be in touch Monday, he said. Henry, get some rest. He let himself out the front door, and the house settled into the quiet of late afternoon, and the rain kept coming down outside, steady and indifferent, the way it always does in Portland in December, washing everything clean whether it wants to be or not. Philip had been gone for nearly 2 hours when I found the envelope. It was the 25th evening the house had emptied out, one son at a time. Nathan first with a curt goodbye at the door, Dominic next with a handshake that lasted half a second longer than usual. Carter last with red eyes and no words, just a hand on my arm that I let stay there for a moment before he left. Ryan had gone upstairs to shower. I was alone in the dining room collecting the coffee cups and stacking the documents Philip had left behind when I saw it sitting underneath the leather portfolio, a plain white envelope, smaller than the others. No number on the front, just 2 words in Margaret's handwriting. For Henry. My legs stopped working. I sat down in the nearest chair and held it in both hands and just looked at it. Not letter 8. Not a number. Just my name in her handwriting, the way she'd written it on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the notes she used to leave on my pillow when she knew I was worried about something and wanted me to find something kind before I fell asleep. My hands were shaking. Not the scopolamine tremor, not the old man tremor, but the specific shaking of a person holding something they are not sure they are ready for. I broke the seal. The letter was 2 pages handwritten, and she had pressed harder on the pen toward the end of each line, the way she always did when she was writing something that mattered. Henry, this one isn't for the family meeting. This one is just for you, and you can decide what to do with it afterward. I want to tell you something about Ryan. I have loved that boy since the day Marcus brought him home from the hospital. You know that. But there is a kind of love that goes beyond blood and beyond duty and beyond even the normal grammar of family, a love that chooses every single day without obligation. That is what Ryan became to me. Not a grandson I was raising out of necessity. Not a substitute for the son we lost. A choice. My choice. Every morning for 8 years. I want you to tell him that. Not from me, I know it will land differently coming from you. Tell him that he was chosen. Not inherited. Not assigned. Chosen. Tell him that in this family, with everything that has happened and everything that has been broken, Hank was the one thing that was never in question. I am so proud of the man he is. I am so proud of the man you helped him become. Take care of each other, Henry. That's all I've ever wanted. All my love, always, Margaret. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point, Ryan came downstairs. He was in a clean shirt, hair still damp, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw my face. Grandpa, I couldn't answer immediately. My throat had closed and my eyes were burning in a way I had not felt since Marcus's funeral, since the day I stood in the rain at a graveside and watched them lower my oldest son into the ground and understood for the first time what it meant to have something taken from you that could never be replaced. Come here, I said. He crossed the room and took the chair beside me, and I held the letter out to him. He read it slowly. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched his jaw tighten, watched the moment he reached the line not inherited, not assigned, chosen because his breath caught audibly and his hand came up to cover his mouth. When he finished the second page, he set it down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something fragile. His shoulders were shaking. His eyes were full and streaming, and he pressed the back of his wrist hard against his mouth and made a sound that broke in half in his throat. She said chosen, he managed. She meant it, I said. Ryan, I mean it too. And then, for the first time since Margaret died, for the first time in longer than that, for the first time in more years than I can accurately count, I stopped holding myself together. I pulled that boy into my arms, and I held on, and everything I had been carrying for 25 days came up and out all at once. And I cried the way I hadn't let myself cry, with my whole chest, with my whole body, with 69 years of love and loss and fatherhood and grief all pressing through at once. Ryan held on just as hard. His arms were shaking around me. He was crying into my shoulder and I was crying into his, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing left to say that the moment hadn't already said better. We stayed like that for a long time, when it finally passed slowly in stages like weather moving through. I pulled back, and Ryan dragged his sleeve across his face and laughed a short, watery laugh. And I laughed too, and for a moment, the dining room felt full, in a way it hadn't since Margaret was in it. She planned this too, Ryan said. Down to the placement under the portfolio, I said. Of course she did. He shook his head, still half-laughing, eyes still bright and wet. She was the most organized person who ever lived. She was, I said. She really was. Ryan picked up the letter one more time and read the last line again. Take care of each other, and then he folded it along Margaret's original creases and held it out to me. Keep it, I said. She wrote it for both of us. He pressed it flat against his chest, both hands over it, like he was holding something that might otherwise float away. Outside, the December rain had softened to a mist. The porch light caught it and turned it gold, and the street was quiet, and somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog barked once and stopped, and the night settled in around the house like something that had been waiting patiently to be let in. What happens now? Ryan asked. I looked at the empty cedar box on the sideboard. All 8 envelopes gone. Everything said that needed saying. Now, I said, we figure out what comes next, together. December came in properly, the week after, cold, unhurried, the kind of Pacific Northwest winter that doesn't announce itself so much as simply arrive and make itself at home. The holiday lights went up on Burnside, and the coffee shops put out their red cups, and the city carried on the way cities do, indifferent to the particular griefs and reckonings happening inside particular houses on particular streets. Nathan left Portland 11 days after the 25th. He called first, which surprised me. I'm going to Seattle for a while, he said. I need some distance. From what? I asked. A pause. From myself, mostly. His voice was quieter than I was used to hearing it. The edges had gone out of it. I'm getting a lawyer, Dad. Not to fight anything. To figure out the restitution. I want to do it right. That's all I'm asking, I said. I know. Another pause. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. It doesn't, I said. But it's a start. He hung up, and I stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking at the garden Margaret had planted along the back fence, dormant now, everything cut back and mulched, waiting for spring. Dominic sent an email 4 days after Nathan left. 3 paragraphs, formal in structure, the way everything from Dominic always was, but the last line said, I should have gone to the police 8 years ago. I didn't. I'll have to live with that. I read it twice and wrote back 2 sentences I know. So will I. Carter called on a Thursday evening mid-December just as I was locking up the workshop. I started seeing someone, he said. A therapist. Twice a week. Good, I said. She says I have a pattern of seeking approval through caretaking and then resenting the people I'm taking care of. He said it with a kind of bleak, startled honesty, like a man reading his own file for the first time. Margaret would have said the same thing, I told him. She just would have been gentler about it. Carter made a sound that was almost a laugh. Yeah, she would have. His voice softened. How are you doing, Dad? Really? Better, I said. Getting better. Is Ryan still there? Every day, I said. He's learning the lathe. A real laugh from Carter this time, surprised and warm. Of course he is. Philip called on a Friday, with the legal confirmation, restitution agreement signed by Nathan and Dominic, estate formally closed, trust board seated and operational. The pediatric wing at Providence Memorial had broken ground. The first round of college scholarships had been awarded to 11 kids from 3 Portland high schools. Margaret's money was already moving through the world in the shape she had intended. Everything is in order, Henry, Philip said. She would be satisfied. She would find something to adjust, I said. Philip laughed a real laugh, the first I'd heard from him in the entire 6 weeks of this. You're probably right. Ryan was in the workshop every morning by 7. I'd started him on the lathe 3 weeks after the 8th letter, basic spindle work, nothing ambitious, just getting the feel of how wood responds to pressure and patience. He was good at it. He had the stillness for it, that particular quality of attention that the lathe demands, and that most people can't manufacture because it has to come from somewhere genuine. One morning in the 3rd week of December, gray sky workshop, warm, the smell of fresh-cut cherry wood filling the air between us, Ryan turned off the lathe and looked at me. Can I ask you something? You always ask that, I said, and you always ask anyway. When you and Grandma built all of this, the company, the house, the family, did you know it would turn out this way? I set down my chisel. Which part, the good or the bad? Either, both. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I knew we were building something. I didn't know what shape it would take. You don't when you're in the middle of it. Ryan turned back to the lathe and ran his thumb along the spindle he'd been working, checking it the way I'd taught him, feeling for the places where the symmetry wasn't quite right yet. I think she knew, he said. I think she knew exactly what shape it was going to take. She had a head start, I said. She paid better attention than the rest of us. Ryan smiled a full, real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. I'm going to try to do that. Pay better attention. That's all any of us can do, I said. He nodded and turned the lathe back on, and the workshop filled with the low, steady hum of it. And I picked up my chisel and went back to the jewelry box I had been finishing for 3 weeks. The maple one, pale and close-grained. The one I'd started with no particular purpose. I knew what it was for now. It was for Ryan. A place to keep the 8th letter. Some things you build, and the reason shows up later. Margaret told me that once, though, she phrased it differently. She said, Henry, you plant the seed in fall, and the flower comes in spring, and the whole time you just have to trust the ground. Outside the workshop window, the December mist pressed soft against the glass, and the city of Portland carried on in its quiet, rain-washed way. And the year that had broken us and remade us was running out its last few days, and inside that workshop, warm and sawdust-smelling, 2 people working side by side without needing to say much at all, something that had almost been lost, was very slowly being built back up. I didn't know yet what it would look like when it was finished, but the wood was good. The grain was straight. And for the first time in a long time, I had all the time I needed. If this grandpa story's taught me anything, it is this: the things we leave behind are never really about money. They are about what we believed when no one was watching. I am Henry Caldwell. I am 69 years old. I made mistakes as a father that I cannot undo. I was too busy building a company when I should have been building conversations. I was too proud to say I love you plainly, without condition, without occasion. If you see yourself in my sons, in Nathan's hunger, in Dominic's silence, in Carter's desperate need to be enough, please do not wait for a cedar box and 8 letters to show you who you have become. Look now. Change now. While the people you love are still in the room. This family story did not end the way anyone expected. The money was gone before we ever opened the first envelope. What remained was a workshop, a boy who chose sawdust over stock portfolios, and an old man who finally learned to cry. I believe God gives us exactly the people we need, not always the people we deserve. Margaret was mine. Ryan is mine. That is more than enough. Every grandpa's story begins with someone who stayed. Every honest family story begins with someone brave enough to tell the truth. I hope this one gave you something to carry home. If something here moved you, a line, a moment, a letter, leave it in the comments. Your words mean more than you know. And if you believe someone you love needs to hear this grandpa stories today, share it with them. No occasion needed. That is the whole point. Subscribe. If you want more stories, like this one, told slowly, told honestly, told the way real family story deserves to be told. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means everything. A gentle heads up, the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and inspiration. If that is not what you are looking for right now, no hard feelings. Step away, find what feeds you, and come back whenever you are ready.